what does modest clothing in Islam entail? And how does that look like for different people from different, backgrounds? The purpose of wearing modest clothing is that when a woman leaves the house, when she is outside, out and about in the society, she is not wearing something that is, she's not wearing something that's enticing, that's appealing, that creates attraction, unnecessary attraction towards her. You could be wearing an abaya and still not be dressed modestly. Why? Because your abaya is too flashy, your abaya is too tight, your abaya is basically enhancing every single part and curve of your body. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Today inshallah we're going to be discussing modest clothing for women in Islam and what does that look like. There have been many times probably where you dressed up for a party or you dressed up for an event or maybe you dressed up for Eid Salah and you go and somebody has to pinpoint the fact that you are not dressed modestly. And you look at yourself and you're like, well, I'm covered, everything seems fine. But the other person's point of view is your dress is not long, you're not wearing an abaya, etc., etc. So today, let's look at what does modest clothing in Islam entail and how does that look like for different people from different, backgrounds, different cultures, and different level of religious practices. So the very first thing that we need to, address right off the bat is hijab is fard. And I have made, I think, 2 videos about hijab and niqab and what to cover and what not. You guys can go and check those out. But by the consensus of the scholars, every scholar agrees that hijab is fard. Now, what is hijab? Hijab is covering your hair, covering your neck, covering your ears, right? Making sure that the top of your body is all covered and then making sure your entire body is covered except for your face, your hands, and your feet, right? So that would be considered hijab and that part is fard across the board. Now, when it comes to modesty, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, Al-haya'u shu'batun min al-iman, that modesty is a branch of faith. And the purpose of wearing modest clothing is that when a woman leaves the house, when she is outside, out and about in the society, she is not wearing something that is, she's not wearing something that's enticing, that's appealing, that creates attraction, unnecessary attraction towards her, right? And it's also about covering your body, right? To a point where, your body is not an object of attraction outside. But what can that look like? What does modesty look like? Or what does modest clothing look like? So there's this idea that you have to wear abaya, right? You have to have an abaya on in order for you to be dressed modestly. And let's address that, right? Abaya is associated with a certain culture. Abaya is not something that every culture around the world, every country around the world practices, right? Something that's considered an abaya in, the Middle East is considered a long dress in the West, right? So it's not something that every culture practices. And yes, while a lot of women, they have opted for the abaya to be their, standard form of modest clothing when they leave the house, for outerwear, that does not mean that that is the only way you can dress modestly. And you'll be surprised at how many people have an issue when this is said because they feel that the only way to dress modestly is to wear an abaya. Think about it. You could be wearing an abaya and still not be dressed modestly. Why? Because your abaya is too flashy, your abaya is too tight, your abaya is basically enhancing every single part and curve of your body. And how is that going to be modest? Right? So modest clothing is not associated with an article of clothing. That's something we need to understand. That modest clothing does not mean modest clothing equals abaya. Modest clothing equals, hijab. Modest clothing equals niqab. No. Modest clothing is any type of clothing that serves the basic requirement of hijab in Islam. And on top of that, it also fulfills the principle of modesty. So generally, what should modest clothing look like? When we leave the house, right? Our skin is not supposed to be showing besides our face and our hands and our feet. So that means that it cannot be transparent. That's the first thing to keep in mind. The second thing to keep in mind is that it cannot be so tight that it is like second skin. Why? Because then that is showing the curves and the shape of your body, which takes away the purpose of wearing modest clothing. So it cannot show the shape of your body, it cannot be stuck to you like second skin. And then the third thing to keep in mind is that it should not have any type of provocative statements written on it that cause unnecessary attention. So, for example, like sometimes there's sweatpants and there's statements written on it on the, the area that covers the behind. Or there's a t-shirt that's long sleeve and baggy and everything, but there's some sort of, weird statement written on the fronts, which basically forces people to read it, and then it has a double meaning to it. That would be wrong. That's not considered modest. So the three things to really keep in mind, the first one is it should not be transparent. The second one is that it should not be stuck to you like second skin. And the third one is that it should not have any type of provocative writing on it that causes attention and it has, double meanings. Now, after addressing, that, what could a modest piece of clothing look like for somebody who does not wear an abaya, right? You can be wearing baggy pants and a baggy shirt that's not stuck to your skin. There's a lot of different companies nowadays, alhamdulillah, run by Muslim women who are actually designing these clothes where, the sleeves are made in a way where they look very fashionable, but yet, your arms are covered. The tunic, it covers your thigh area, your behind. So it's, you're not, the shape of your body is not showing, and they look very stylish and fashionable as well. And there's nothing wrong with opting for those options. A lot of times I see, people going for baggy shirts and sweatshirts. And if that's something that you're comfortable with and your parents are okay with, as long as you're wearing a hijab with it, there's nothing wrong with it. And, this discussion is important because this is how we're pushing away young girls and young women from their deen. This is how we're pushing them away from the masajid. So many teenagers I come across, so many young adults I come across, young professionals, young women who have a very bad experience. Why? Because they went to the masjid and somebody is like, well, you should be wearing a black abaya. She was already wearing an abaya, so you should be wearing a black abaya. Let's also clarify that today, that yes, in certain communities and in certain cultures, that is the norm, that, women wear black abayas. You don't have to wear black abayas. You can wear colorful clothing, especially, one of the things that I always, mention and talk about is, especially in the West, like if you're going to a mall and you're wearing full black abaya, alhamdulillah, it's fine if you're wearing it, but it's actually going to cause more attention towards you because you're the only one that's wearing it at that point, right? So, let's have these open discussions and let's become open-minded that the Quran does not say wear an abaya, right? The hadith does not say wear an abaya. The hadith in the Quran talk about covering yourself and covering certain parts of the body. Yes, did the women of Makkah and Medina wear abayas or wear long clothes at that point? Yes, they did. But guess what? Even the non-Muslims at that time did. Even the non-Muslim women of that time did. And then if you look in recent history, right? Any practicing, a Catholic or Christian or Jew woman, right? They all have a certain type of clothing that actually is very similar to abaya, right? But at the end of the day, if today's generation wants to wear clothing that is not an abaya and it's not a long dress and it is a tunic or a sweatshirt or baggy pants, as long as it fulfills the part that's not transparent, it is not stuck to them like second skin, and which means it's not so tight, and it doesn't have any provocative statements on it, there is nothing wrong with that. And you know what? As weird as this sounds, when you have this conversation with young girls, they actually come back wearing hijabs to you as well. A lot of times I've had this conversation with a bunch of young women who are not wearing hijab at that point. And I meet them a month or 2 months later, and they realize that they can keep their identity and they can also have a hijab on to make them even feel closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Now, while we're talking about modest clothing, I really quickly want to mention, what does it mean to create unnecessary attention? And in my makeup video, I've talked about this, but same thing with clothing, right? You know, a person who doesn't have good intentions, he will look at you even if you're wearing a niqab. And this is something that the parents of young women have to understand. And the parents of young men have to understand as well. That, you know, just because a woman is covered, right? You can't label her immodest, right? Just because, you know, a man is looking at her or a man finds her pretty or appealing or whatever it is, that's his problem. That's his problem because, you know, if she is covered and she's wearing baggy clothing and she's wearing, you know, everything, like basically it's fulfilling the requirements of modest clothing, right? And yet somebody's still staring at her. That is his problem. And we need to actually, you know, change this narrative that I've heard young, you know, when I teach halqas with the youth, I've been working with youth for almost 10 years now, more than 10 years actually, alhamdulillah, them being told that you are the reason for a boy or a man committing a sin because you dress this way. And I look at their dress and it's a very nice, pretty, you know, dress. It's not flashy at all. You know, she has her purse with her. She has her hijab on, you know, and she holds herself. She conducts herself in a very honorable way. And okay, if he's looking at her, you know, somebody needs to have that conversation that, brother, don't pay, you know, unnecessary attention to women either. So these are the conversations we really need to have instead of shutting down our girls and not letting them dress in a way they want that's actually modest, right? So always remember that, you know, always keeping that in mind, that it goes both ways. You know, definitely, yes, there are women, there are young girls who wear clothes that are inappropriate or very tight, or actually they are actually demanding attention. I mean, I'm not saying that that's okay. That's completely unacceptable. That's haram. But if we're wearing modest clothing and we're still getting attention, that's not our problem, right? Because as I mentioned earlier, a person with an ill intention will even look at a niqabi and figure out, like, you know, who she is or what she's wearing or how she is. So these are some of the things that, you know, we really need to discuss. And these are points that we need to discuss, especially with our young girls, especially with those that have just reached puberty, especially those that are about to go to college and high school, those that are young professionals as well, and that you can, you know, wear things besides abayas and still call yourself modest, right? And then also, you know, I want to end with saying that let's stop pulling each other down. Let's stop being the judge of each other's character, right? Because if a sister is coming to the masjid, if a young girl is coming to a halqa in the masjid, if there's youth group going on, our local masjid does youth groups for young girls and young boys, you know, every Friday. So if these kids are actually coming to the masjid and they're listening to the halaqas and playing games with other Muslims and then, you know, spending time at the masjid, why do we have to push them away by, you know, making comments like, hey, your clothes are not modest? It's better to model what modesty is and give them options. You can wear this, you can wear this, you can wear this. And all of this is considered modest clothing for women. Inshallah, you know, next time we will be talking about the use of perfume, because those are the questions that I'm getting as well. And the types of jewelry, inshallah. But I don't want to prolong this video. Inshallah, I'll see you guys next time. If you guys have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave in the comment section below, and I'll definitely get back to you guys. Please do like, share, and subscribe to this video. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.